We're going to start the football news with going through the press conference that happened yesterday. There was a press conference with Kalen DeBoer as well as Nick Sheridan and Kane Womack. For those of you that are not familiar, this is going to be a little bit different by how we used to see it with Nick Saban. Nick Saban was very famous that he did not have his coordinators talk to the press during the season. It was only postseason or preseason that the coordinators, were allowed to speak to the media, as well as freshmen. Freshmen and coordinators were not allowed to speak to the media. So it is a little different that we are getting coordinators to speak to the media. I don't mind it. Obviously, I kind of prefer being able to hear things out of the mouth of the people that may be calling the plays or that work with these guys on the a little bit more intimate day-to-day basis. But I want to kind of cover some of the high points that we heard discussed. So the first guy up was Nick Sheridan. Sheridan was kind of talking. It was announced that Sheridan is going to be calling plays from the press box. He's going to be able to utilize the in-helmet communications. For those of you that aren't aware, this season there's going to be in-helmet comms for the quarterback as well as for somebody on the defense. So they talked a little bit about that. Sheridan was talking about how, they're having to be a little bit picky on what they say to the quarterback or the person on the field. Obviously you want to get the play in, but is there enough time to say anything else, to critique or anything like that? And basically what they've determined is if there's a stoppage in play or if there's like some extra time, then maybe you can have some type of discussion, where you get some additional information to that person with the communications. But for the most part, they're having to keep that communication to a minimum because you don't want them trying to retain too much while they're kind of in the flow of the game. That's really saved for when they're on the sideline, as it typically would be. There was a little bit of discussions about that. They kind of, both Sheridan and DeBoer, raved on Jalen, saying that he's been really making great decisions. He's been super consistent. Everybody's fully aware of what his attitude and effort's going to be. It's kind of exactly what you need out of a quarterback. And then DeBoer also was like super happy that Jalen, when DeBoer and Sheridan came in and were inputting the offensive game plan, offensive playbook, they talked about how, some of the things they input in a certain format, right? They maybe don't input everything at the same time just because it's easier to digest and it works, this concept builds on this concept. And they said that they really appreciated how Jalen, allowed them to be able to put that in and not rush them to like, oh, I'm really good at this, so like let's input this early. He kind of let the guys do what they're intended to do, and he thought the kind of all fall camp that's been great, and that they've really loved how he's been and the consistent leader he's been out on the field. So that's obviously really good to hear. In terms of the right tackle battle, I'm not sure if y'all are aware, but we've had an ongoing right tackle battle kind of all off season. And it's between Wilcom Formby and Elijah Pritchett. Based on what Sheridan said, he's not going to name an official starter until game time. They obviously know who has won the battle, but they're not going to give Western Kentucky any ammo. They're not going to tell him who's won the battle. But he said that he really likes where both guys are at, and that, need be, both guys can play. But they do know who has won the battle. They're just not going to be announcing that until game time. And then on the injury front, there's three guys that were talked most about in terms of injuries. Jam Miller, Jaden Roberts, and Jeremiah Alexander. Jam Miller and Jaden Roberts both being on the offensive side. Based on what DeBoer came out and said, that Jam and Jaden both intend to practice this week and play, and then Jeremiah Alexander is not probably going to be practicing or playing this week, but that his timetable is very, very soon, and that we should see him in the here coming weeks. But this week is probably not going to happen. So that's most of what we heard on the offensive side. There wasn't, a ton of specific information. He talked a little bit about some of the receivers and some of the progressions that these guys have made. Based on everything that we've heard, it really sounds like each position group is kind of making the strides in which you want to see them make. So that's obviously really good to hear. It sounds like Jaden Roberts and, the returning guys like Milroe have done a really good job of kind of making sure the culture, making sure the mindset of all the players is where it needs to be. And that's really all you want to hear in the offseason, right? all the things that you expect to hear in the offseason are what you want to hear. But the one thing Sheridan did say that I thought was super important and something to really remember is he goes, we can practice all these times, we can have fall camp, we can have spring camp, but we're going to really probably learn more about this team in one game than we would in 30 practices, right? So at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot to talk about after the first game, but then also we're going to have some things to look forward to for game 2 and beyond of what went well, what went wrong, and kind of what we're looking to see fixed. So that's something really I think to keep in mind as a fan as well is at the end of the day, this is their first game on the field. Obviously, you're looking at certain big picture items like, hey, how does the offensive line look? How does how is Jalen's decision making? Obviously, you want to win the game, but you're looking at kind of each position group, how did they win that specific battle and that specific matchup? Because this is kind of to build for the rest of the season. Then we transitioned over to the defense, and Kane Womack was talking, and he kind of first was talking a little bit about how he's happy to be back calling plays. It was the one thing he missed when he was a head coach that, he feels kind of in his element, being able to call plays and be a coordinator. And like I said, when he was a head coach, that was what he missed the most. And then he also talked about, we'll cover that in a second. Then he was talked a little bit about TJ Finley. So TJ Finley is the quarterback for Western Kentucky. If you recognize the name, it's because this is going to be his third time playing Alabama. He has been at LSU and Auburn, was the 2 times that he had played Alabama previously. And then Kalen DeBoer actually played him last year at Texas State. So, Alabama as well as Kane Womack himself have some experience facing Finley. And when he was talking about, facing him at South, he talked about how he had experience, facing him, and he knows how Finley faces adversity as well as success. And something else that he talked about was talking about his release, right? And it's something that I feel like obviously coaches they think about it and they talk about it amongst themselves, but it's not something you hear a lot talked about in a press conference, I feel like, was that Womack was talking about like, hey, Finley has a really good release. This is how he might go through progressions. He's not afraid to take the shot, but then if he needs to drop, do a dump off pass, it's good. And then something else they talked about that I don't know that I've ever heard a defensive coordinator specifically mention in this way is talking about the escape style, right? So how Finley may escape the pocket, and that being something that they look at every quarterback, right? How this quarterback may escape differently than Milroe or differently than Simpson, and something that they need to key in on because the defense may be used to seeing Milroe or Simpson escape this way versus Finley's going to escape this other way. So it's something else you just need to cue in on kind of from a scout team perspective and from a, making sure that you know what the intention behind that quarterback is. And it's something, like I said, I'm sure that coaches talk about in practice, but it's just something I don't think that you hear a lot in a press conference. And I thought it was just really cool to hear Womack talk about it. The other thing he talked about was talking about Helton's system. So Todd Helton is the head coach at Western Kentucky, and if you recognize the last name, his brother Clay Helton was the coach at USC previously, and he's from a fairly known offensive family and family in football. And he talked about how that system, along with Jeff Brom and all the different guys that run kind of that style of system, what it was like going against them, and said that the group really they like to attack you vertically. They like to, obviously they'll make some easy throws, but they really like to push the ball down the field. They're not afraid to run the quarterback. And if you know about Finley's about 6'6" and just a big guy. And so running the quarterback obviously is something that Alabama's going to have to be, keenly aware of because, and Womack talked about it, he's a big guy, right? And when you have a guy that big, if he falls forward, he's going to get 3 to 4 yards. And so that's something you have to be fully aware of, how to stop that specifically because, that's a unique challenge when you have somebody that's that physical of a presence at the quarterback position. The other thing he talked about is that they're going to come in and out of tempo, right, using tempo to their advantage. And so it's just something that he fully expects that they're going to be able to stress out the defense in certain instances. And then, was talking about, obviously, we're going to have to game plan to attack where they may be weak and vice versa. But just obviously sounded like he knows what he's doing, which we fully expect. But it was just cool to kind of hear him talk about, going against this system before. This is not his first time facing, Helton's system, and then going against a quarterback that he's gone against before as well, and kind of what he thinks about, having faced the quarterback previously. The other thing that both coordinators were asked about was DeBoer, right? They were asked like, hey, they were asked them about themselves, like, hey, is anything different when it comes to game week? And both of them basically said, no, that's what you prepare for. May have a few jitters or a few nerves, but that's completely normal. You have butterflies in your stomach. It's because it means something to you, right? Pretty standard stuff. But then both guys were asked about DeBoer and like, hey, do you see anything different in DeBoer on a game week versus something else? And the simple answer was no, right? He's the same guy all the time. The comment that Womack said is whether he's preparing for a game late in the fourth quarter, he's in his office preparing before a game, or you're hanging out with him with your buddies on the boat, like he's kind of the same guy. There's a steadiness, there is a humble confidence, there's an even-keeledness that comes to DeBoer that really is kind of the steadiness in the fire, so to speak, that he portrays into his coaching staff as well as into his players, and something they both raved on. And part of the reason why Womack even said he wanted to come back and coach for DeBoer again was, that's somebody that he feels like he could go into the foxhole with, was kind of his verbiage about it. And I thought it was just really cool to obviously hear that. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the differences in Saban and DeBoer, and I have a video that kind of goes into depth on that. But I think this is just another example of, not to say that Saban was different game day versus other times, but it feels like DeBoer is very much a like level-headed, this is what I prepared for. This is what I'm, not like an arrogance, but a confidence that like, hey, I've gone through my checklist. I've done my preparation. I, know what time I'm getting to the hotel. I know what time we're doing this. I know what time we're doing that. Like he has it mapped out, and knowing we've spent all this time preparing, now it's just time to execute, right? And I think that that's something that you hear a lot talked about with DeBoer, is about how, confident he is in himself and in his system, and that's part of the reason why you would be willing to take a job after Nick Saban, right? You take a job after the greatest of all time, and it's because you have a feeling and you believe in yourself to think that your system would succeed and would be able to thrive in a place like this, right? Because Tuscaloosa is not the place for the faint of heart. So that's what really the talk was in terms of the coaching staff and what their kind of outlook on what they were looking for the first game. I want to kind of give a few of my thoughts and kind of big overarching what I'm looking for, and then a score prediction, and then we'll wrap up and get out of here. So on the offensive side of things, I'm looking at kind of three spots, right? I'm looking at the offensive line, I'm looking at the wide receivers, and I'm looking at the quarterback. I'm slightly less concerned about the running back. I, to a degree, know what I'm getting out of Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. I'd like to see, Justice Haynes in an elevated role this season and see kind of what he can make out of that. But I'm a little less concerned about that, just because I know the skill set that's there. From the offensive line, that's kind of for me where it starts. The offensive line kind of was talked a lot about last season about how they gave up so many sacks. And if you followed the team pretty closely, you know that they had gained a good bit of weight, and they thought that weight was going to help them in the rushing game. And in reality, it may have hurt them a little bit in the passing game, because it had them a little bit flat on their feet, and they weren't quite as fleet of foot in the pass protections to be able to stop the pass rush, and they just gave up entirely too many sacks. And I think that's the spot that I want to look at first and foremost for this game, is how is the offensive line at keeping Jalen upright, right? Jalen is going to scramble, is going to, use his feet at times, I'm sure. But, how is the offensive line at being able to allow him to go through his progressions? Obviously, it's going to be game one. Your right tackle we talked about earlier may be, I'm assuming they're practicing with the ones all of this week. But, that position has been kind of moving around a little bit. But, just curious to see how they keep Jalen upright. So that's kind of first and foremost on the offense. Then the second thing I would be looking at is Jalen, right? Obviously, we just talked about the confidence and the even-keeledness that DeBoer and Sheridan both talked about with him. But I think something we saw with Jalen at times last year was him trying to take a little too much into his hands, right? Trying to think that he has to do everything. I obviously think that DeBoer's system is going to help with that. I think that DeBoer, having worked with quarterbacks and doing what he's done with quarterbacks of the past, I think is going to be a huge help to that. But watching Jalen and seeing how he's going through progression, seeing how he's taking what the defense gives him, that's something I'm very curious to see. And you can tell, is he rushing throws? Is he, going through his progressions? Is he, a one read and go? Like what's happening? And I fully expect his ability to not be any of those things, but just seeing it on the field for the first game in DeBoer's system is something that I'm personally very interested in. And then the third piece of that is the receivers. And I say the receivers because this is a young group. We have only a couple of returners. And I'm just curious to see who kind of becomes the alpha and who becomes one of the go-to targets. My gut says Jeremy Bernard is going to be one of those guys. Coming in, I think that potentially Ryan Williams could be one of those guys. But you have a lot of freshmen, whether it be Ryan Williams, whether it be Caleb Odom. You just have quite a few different freshmen that have either highlight names or just people that you've seen kind of stand out during scrimmages or heard stand out during scrimmages. So that's the thing for me is how is the wide receiver group at getting open, being sure-handed, catching the ball, and, being that steadying force that Jalen's going to need, in his first real game in this system. So on the offensive side, that's kind of the three groups I'm mostly concerned about or kind of looking at in order of importance. For me, first and foremost, it has to start with the offensive line just because I had the biggest concerns last season with that offensive line. And it's something that thankfully we have 3 games to get ready prior to like the Georgia game. But it's something that, like in that South Florida game, we got absolutely destroyed at the offensive line position, right? And so it's something like that where, getting a head start early and keeping him upright early and often is something that I'm really looking forward to from the offensive line perspective. From a defensive perspective, I'm mostly looking at the corners. Not to say that I'm looking only at the corners, but I think that the corner position and the defensive back position is a position that I'm most concerned about and most looking forward to coming into this season, right? I think that we are bringing in Keon Sabb. I think that we're returning Malachi Moore. We're returning some guys at that position that I think can have some success. And I think that we have the ability to be very good there. But it just ceases to be seen, right? You graduate and go to the draft. Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. You lose Caleb Downs to the transfer portal. And this is just a new group, right? It's obviously also a new defense. This is not the same defense that we ran under Nick Saban. And so I'm just curious to see kind of what that corner group looks like. I think that based on the defense that Womack runs, there is a very high likelihood that Alabama could win the game, obviously, but that could get some turnovers. I think that there could be some takeaways, especially with his knowledge of Finley and how Finley, has success and the type of play style that Helton runs. I think that it would not surprise me if Alabama had some success and potentially got a takeaway or two from Finley. But that defensive back group is a place that I'm really just concerned and looking forward to seeing what we have in that group. Just because it's the most newcomers, right? You've got Damani Jackson, the transfer from USC, that's his first time in an Alabama uniform. You've got the incoming guys with Mbakwe and Zabian Brown and all of the incoming freshman defensive backs that all have been raved on and all we hear great things about. But, again, we haven't seen them in an Alabama uniform in real game time. So just ceases to be seen, what success they could have, what mistakes they may make, how they recover from those mistakes. Based on what Womack is saying, he sees a lot of really good things out of these guys. Often when they make a mistake, they correct it and you don't see that mistake again, which is great. But, at the end of the day, that had a lot to do with practice. This is real game time, and now it's just to see what happens when you put it on the field. So that's the big thing for me is looking at how the defensive backs work and how that group kind of meshes together and how they look in their first game, especially going against a defense that likes to stretch the ball down the field. I'm less concerned about like your middle linebackers because you have Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell returning from last season, and I think that the experience there is going to kind of overwhelm all. And then on the defensive line perspective, we have some returners and some new guys, but just overall, I don't think that group is the group that I'm most concerned about. I think that Alabama's recruited really well, and that's one of the spots that you've had the some like Freddie Roach stayed, so you have kind of the same coach that was there previously. So I'm a little less concerned with that than I am the defensive backs. So from the defensive perspective, that's where I'm going to be looking the most and kind of paying the most attention in this game. Obviously, we'll have a lot of things that happen during this game, good, bad, and otherwise, that we'll talk about in the post-cap. That's going to be coming out on Sunday. So if you do see anything that you want me to discuss on the episode on Sunday, throw it in my Twitter mentions, throw it in the comments here on YouTube or, Spotify, Substack, wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'm happy to talk about it in the post cap that we do on Sunday. So I want to quickly give my prediction and kind of talk about what I think, kind of this outlook might be. Personally, I think the score is going to be somewhere in the 41-17 ilk, right? Something like that. I think that Alabama is going to have some success. I think that DeBoer and Sheridan are going to be able to score points. I believe in his system. I believe in his ability to put guys in space and his ability to, put his players in a position to make successful plays and to make the right decision. I think that Jalen has that ability, obviously, and I think that we're going to have some success. I do think that early it would not shock me if TJ Finley was able to get maybe some plays on the defense before we fully kind of get him we're going to have to make some adjustments, right? I think that we're not going to rattle him early. This is not his first time playing against Alabama. This is not his first time playing in Bryant-Denny. So I think that because of his experience, it wouldn't shock me if early on he has a confidence that may allow him to make a few plays that he otherwise maybe wouldn't. So that wouldn't shock me. So I do think that they're going to score, obviously, but I do think that Alabama is going to be able to make some adjustments and is going to be able to come out victorious. I also believe in our kicker. So that's why I'm throwing on a couple of field goals on there, because it would not shock me to see DeBoer, I don't want to say be more conservative, but understand, hey, I have 3 in my pocket. Let me, be slightly more conservative here because I know my kicker can make this kick. So that's something that I'm personally looking at. I think that Alabama is going to have some success in this first game. I do think that there's going to be obviously plenty of things to take away, good, bad, and otherwise, when we come look at this game after the fact, but we'll talk about those on Sunday. So if you, like I said, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, throw them down in the bottom and I'm happy to discuss. But thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.